Good afternoon. We're back with more Marvel Champions, and today will be a card review of the player cards in the Galaxy's Most Wanted expansion box. The two heroes for this expansion are Groot and Rocket Raccoon. And we'll take a look, particularly relevant because it is currently May 5th, 2023, and Guardians of the Galaxy 3 will be coming out very shortly. Let's take a look at Groot and Rocket Raccoon and see how they stack up. Groot's alter ego has 4 recovery, and his action is Growth Spurt. Place 2 growth counters on Groot to a maximum of 10, limit once per round. Well, we have no way of knowing what that does until we see the rest of his cards. Hand size 6, hit points 10. 10 is a little surprising. I thought Groot would have higher hit points. Stats are 1, 2, 3. Forced interrupt: when Groot would take any amount of damage, remove that many growth counters from him. For each growth counter removed this way, prevent 1 damage. Well, the strength of this depends on the methods available to him to build up growth counters, because you really never want to be in alter ego mode in true solo on higher difficulties, and probably not in multiplayer either, unless it's an absolute emergency. So you'd like to go the whole game with maybe flipping to alter ego once or twice, and sometimes if you do that you won't get away with it. You'll just lose even once or twice. So it really depends on how many methods of building up growth counters Groot has. His first card is Fruition. Place 2 growth counters on Groot. Okay, we'll have to see the rest of the cards to know how strong that is. I Am Groot. 3 cost event. Remove threat from a scheme equal to the number of growth counters on Groot. To make this good, you'd probably need around 8 growth counters on Groot. And since he has a forced interrupt of removing the counters if he takes damage, that means you have to keep damage off of him in order to get I Am Groot to be good. But in solo, it's very, very difficult to keep damage off of your hero, especially on higher difficulties. So I would say on higher difficulties in solo, it's extremely unlikely that I Am Groot will be any good. Probably would need a multiplayer team, and you'd probably need them to tank for you while you build up your counters in order to make this particular card good. I think in solo, a lot of the time you'd be paying 3 to remove like 2 threat or something, and that would be awful. I Am Groot. 2 cost. Deal damage to an enemy equal to the number of growth counters on Groot. Similar situation as I Am Groot. You need to build up growth counters quite a bit. I'd say 6 at least to make this good. And that will be very difficult in solo, considering he has the forced interrupt of removing growth counters when you take damage. Now, if that was just an interrupt and not a forced interrupt, I think that would help Groot a lot. He might even be pretty good if it wasn't a forced interrupt, but it is. So, very unlikely with these first 2 cards that you'll be able to build up the counters to make them good in solo, and in multiplayer you require teammate aid in order to make that happen. Root Stomp. Deal 5 damage. If this attack defeats that enemy, place 1 growth counter. This is weak for what it offers, I would say. Well, it's not weak. It's fine if you can reliably use it to defeat an enemy. The problem is, if you are really trying to use it in situations where you defeat an enemy, a lot of the time you're going to be overkilling, and that's going to reduce the cost effectiveness of the card. So if you could do exactly 5 damage and get a growth counter, then this card is fine. If you're overkilling, it's not that good though. And if you're not overkilling, then it's not that good because you don't get the growth counter. We Are Groot. 1 cost event. Remove up to 4 growth counters from Groot. Choose that many friendly characters. Give each of those characters a tough status card. Well, you're not going to be able to use both We Are Groot and I Am Groot or I Am Groot effectively, because they all require the same resource, which is so far relatively difficult to build up, requiring alter ego mode or fruition. So either you have to spend We Are Groot or I Am one of the I Am Groots, and then wait a number of turns before you can make another big play. Well, that's the only option. Or you have to accept that the other cards that you're going to play are going to be for reduced amounts, which will make them not very good. So the pattern that they seem to be going for with Groot is build up the growth counters and then make a big play all at once. That's not really possible in solo. In solo, it seems like this hero is just never going to be able to make a big play. Really never, unless there's more cards coming that really build up the counters more. Fertile Ground. Exhaust Fertile Ground, place one growth counter on Groot and draw a card. That's fine, but it does require you to switch to Alter Ego, which, as I mentioned, we don't want to do in solo, and we don't want to do in higher difficulties in multiplayer either. And so this is not going to help that much with Groot's problem right now, which is not being able to build up enough growth counters. Entangling Vines. When Groot makes a basic thwart, remove one growth counter from him and exhaust Entangling Vines. Gets +2 for that thwart. Okay, but that's going to reduce the efficiency of your other growth counter cards. Lashing Vines. After Groot uses a basic counter, remove 2 growth counters from it and exhaust Lashing Vines to ready Groot. Two growth counters for a ready is pretty expensive. That's pretty expensive. I would like to see something like remove one growth counter, ready Groot and draw a card, or ready Groot and give him +1 damage, or something like that. 2 growth counters for just a ready is very expensive. Vine Shield. When Groot defends an attack, remove one growth counter and exhaust Vine Shield. Groot gets +3 defense for that attack. Okay. We've seen few ways to add counters, especially outside of Alter Ego mode. There's only Fruition and Root Stomp. It take a long time to build up counters, and then all of his cards want to use counters, which means they can't all be used efficiently. This hero does not look strong to me. Vine Spikes. When Groot makes a basic attack, remove one growth counter from him and exhaust Vine Spikes. He gets +2. Okay, well, one of the things we really look for in solo play is what can the hero do if you don't have his basic action available, because a lot of the time in solo, especially on higher difficulties, you're dealing with multiple boss attacks in the same turn. Particularly on heroic mode, where it's turns where you only have one boss attack to defend feel like a breath of fresh air. And so if you have to use Groot to defend multiple attacks, and you can't have him take damage or you lose all your growth counters and your cards won't be any good. That requires running protection. If you're running protection and you're using his actions to defend attacks because you have to, how does he remove threat except by building up counters on I Am Groot, which is 3 cost, and it'll be hard to build up enough counters to make that good. You won't be able to do it every turn, certainly. But otherwise, how will he remove threat? If his action is used by like the expert card that exhausts you, or his obligation, or just having to defend an attack because the boss is attacked 2 or 3 times in one turn, if his action isn't available, that makes the last 3 cards in his set useless, because they all require a basic action. Entangling Vines for thwart. You could Lashing Vines, but that's so inefficient to remove 2 growth counters to ready him. He'll burn through like 3 growth counters, that's a Fruition and a Root Stomp, just to ready him and make 1 basic attack. That's incredibly expensive. And so if his action's been used, because you took 2 boss attacks, you've probably taken damage, which removed your growth counters. You may not even have the option of using Lashing Vines, if it's even on the table. And if your hero doesn't have his basic action available, what can he do? Like, you look at an S-tier hero like Ant-Man. If Ant-Man's basic action has been used, he can still flip forms, he can deal a damage, he can remove a threat. He has his army of ants, which can ping for damage. He has his helmet, which can heal him, which can draw a card. He has his giant stomp, which can deal 8 damage, and you don't have to charge anything up, it just works. His hive mind, I think it is, which removes threat and doesn't have any caveats. To get I Am Groot to the level of damage of Giant Stomp, you'd need 8 growth counters. That's 4 turns in Alter Ego mode, or 4 plays of Fruition, and you only have 3 copies, or 3 plays of Fruition and 2 Root Stomps. That's a crazy amount of work just to get to the level of a card that already comes ready to go in another hero pack. This hero seems very, very weak to me. I think this is probably the weakest hero that I've looked at so far. For solo play, we'll file him firmly into the fun thematic category and not recommend that anyone pick up this expansion if your reason for buying it is player cards. We haven't looked at the quests yet. The quests alone may be worth the price of admission, but certainly what you're getting with Groot is one of the weak, if not the weakest hero in the game. He may even take that spot away from probably Hulk is the weakest at the moment. But yeah, this hero is very weak. Borderline useless, maybe outright useless most of the time when his action isn't available, which is going to happen a lot in higher difficulties because of his obligation, because of the expert card that exhausts you, because of multiple attacks. Yeah, this is just a very weak hero. We'll still test him out, but I don't expect that test to be very long or to go very well. And what would fix this hero? I would like to see Fruition add 4 growth counters. And I would like to see his hero ability be a interrupt and not a forced interrupt, so it's optional. And then I think Groot would be really interesting and fun to play, probably. You could make some big charge up plays with I Am Groot, We Are Groot. He needs more growth counters. More growth counters that you can add during hero form, particularly. And he needs to not be forced to remove them when you take damage. And then I think he would be very playable, maybe even good. Let's take a look at the other cards that come in the Groot deck. We've got Starhawk. 2-cost protection ally, 1 thwart, 2 attack. When Starhawk takes damage exactly equal to his remaining hit points, return him to your hand. He's on the weaker side as far as his stats go, and the upside to him seems to be able to replay him. I don't add much value to that. I don't really like cards that allow you to replay them, but they are mediocre to make up for that, because I don't really consider that the ability to replay a mediocre card over and over to be much of an upside or that good, so probably wouldn't run Starhawk. Desperate defense we've seen. Fighting Fit. Deal 2 damage to the villain, 5 instead if your hero's remaining hit points are equal to or greater than your hero's starting hit points. So if you're at full life or higher, you get 5 damage instead of 2. Even so, that's not very good. That's like a relentless assault, but with a requirement. Yeah, not very good. Power protection we've seen. Dauntless, 1 cost upgrade. Play under any player's control, max 1 per player. While your hero's remaining hit points are equal to or greater than your hero's starting hit points, your hero gains Retaliate 1. There's already a way to give Retaliate 1. Electrostatic armor. Functionally, it's not quite that, but it's something similar. I think that requires your hero to defend. Dauntless is not a tech upgrade. It's hard to keep your hero at full HP in solo. It's not easy at all. So a lot of the time I think this will just be useless. Like with, it's just not easy to do. You have cards that deal 1 damage to your hero. Shocker, Energy Blast from Ultron. You have multiple attacks a lot of the time. Yeah, it's really not easy to do, and the upside isn't really sufficient to build your entire strategy around that, because Retaliate 1 is okay, but Retaliate 1 is something that comes installed with Captain America's shield, and you get +1 defense on that card. It's built into Black Panther. So it would need to be like Retaliate 2 or something to make this worth it. Make it worth building a deck around, I think. And Fighting Fit would probably need to be something like 7 damage to make it worth it. Hard to Ignore. 1 cost upgrade after your hero defends against an attack and takes no damage. Exhaust Hard to Ignore. Remove 1 threat. Okay, that's pretty good. I'd run that in a protection deck. I think that happens often enough to make it good. It's cheap. Yeah, I would run that. Threat reduction is pretty inefficient, so we don't have as high a standards for our threat reduction cards as we do for our damage cards, in order to say that they're relatively good. Indomitable we've seen before. Rocket Raccoon ally. 3 cost, 2 thwart, 1 attack. When Rocket attacks a minion, he gets +3 attack for that attack. That attack gains overkill. That's one of the best allies in the game. He's up there with Hawkeye, Maria Hill. Others that I'm not thinking of at the moment, but yeah, that's a strong ally. I would include him in every deck that has the Guardian trait, unless somebody else is playing the Rocket Raccoon hero. Very strong ally. Probably the strongest basic ally outside of Nick Fury. You got our team up. Groot and Rocket Raccoon. Place 2 growth counters on Groot to a maximum of 10 and ready him. Or place 2 charge counters on a Rocket Raccoon upgrade and ready that upgrade. We don't know what the charge counters on Rocket Raccoon do, having not looked at those cards yet, so we'll withhold judgment. Deft Focus, 1 cost upgrade, 1 per player. Exhaust. Deft Focus, reduce the resource cost of the next superpower card you play this turn by 1. That's a good resource generator if you've got a lot of superpower cards. You probably need to be able to get like 4 uses out of it per game to make it good. So it's very dependent on whether or not you have a lot of superpower cards in your deck. If you do, I would include this card. Okay. Well, so far we haven't seen much from these player cards, with the exception of the Rocket Raccoon ally, who is very good. Very strong ally. Let's take a look at the Rocket Raccoon hero. His alter ego has 3 recovery, action, choose and discard a tech upgrade you control to draw 2 cards. We don't know what that... We won't know the strength of that until we see his tech upgrades. Rocket Raccoon hero, 2 thwart, 1 attack, 1 defense. After you deal excess damage to an enemy, draw one card. Okay. Excess damage happens pretty frequently. That's a pretty strong ability. I like it. Probably not going to happen every turn. And it's going to be better in some scenarios than others. But card draw is strong. Now his hand size is standard, his hit points are weak, and his defense is weak. And so one of the things that happens a lot against high difficulty quests or like heroic mode quests is turn one you have 2 boss attacks to deal with. Happens all the time. And in solo, if that's the case, boy, you're going to be hurting. You can only defend one of them and your defense is only for one, and then you don't have your basic attack available. Your basic action. And you may just flat out die, depending on the boss. Like, if Claw on Expert or Heroic attacked you twice on turn one, you could really just die right there. 9 HP with only 1 defense is weak. He may have to run Leadership or maybe Protection if his thwarting is strong enough, but probably Leadership in solo. I've got a plan. This was a similar problem that I faced with Hawkeye. Hawkeye was a pretty decent damage hero. He's just so squishy. He's got 1 defense and only 9 HP, similar to Rocket, and very, very squishy. Strong kind of damage utility, but so fragile that he's incapable of taking on high difficulty content in solo. I've got a plan. After you make a basic thwart, ready Rocket Raccoon. Rocket Raccoon gets +1 thwart while in hero phase until the end of the phase. Good if you have your basic thwart available. You won't always in solo or in high difficulty because sometimes you get exhausted by your obligation or by the expert card that exhausts you, and sometimes you have to defend an attack or else you die. But with Rocket's 1 defense, you really don't want to be defending against attacks. You really want an ally swarm type of situation, or potentially if protection gets to the point where you can reliably have a protection card to help you defend every round. But you're using a lot of cards doing that and not getting a lot of value for them. I think ally swarm is probably the way to go in solo. And so if you don't have your basic action available, this card is useless. If you do, you get basically 3 in value for the cost of 1 plus the event. That's still pretty weak. That's a pretty weak card. I would prefer he get +2 thwart for that. In which case we'd say, okay, it's alright. Reload, 1 cost event, ready each tech upgrade you control. We haven't seen the tech upgrades yet, so no idea. Schadenfreude, 2 cost event until the end of the turn. Heal 2 damage from Rocket Raccoon each time you deal any amount of damage to an enemy. That is certainly something he's going to need, being squishy. Are there multiples of this? No, just 1. Okay. Well, healing's hard to come by. This has the potential to be efficient healing. You'd need to do like damage 3 times or something like that. It's doable. But probably not something you can consistently do every time you draw the card, but it's doable. Possible to make this good. Salvage, after you spend this card, put a tech upgrade from your discard pile on top of your deck. Very good resource generator with an additional effect. Battery pack, enters play with 2 charge counters, exhausted to move a charge counter to another tech upgrade. Okay. Don't know how good that is until we see the tech upgrades. Cybernetic Skeleton, you get +3 hit points, while in hero form you get +1 attack. You'd need to take advantage of that like 3 times to make this good. That's not too much, so this is a pretty good upgrade. It's cheap. It gives you a lot. It's not that useful if you don't have your basic action available. Particle Cannon, 3-cost upgrade, enters play with 2 charge counters, exhaust it, and remove 1 charge counter to deal 4 damage to an enemy. So for the cost of 4, you get 8 damage. If you use it with battery pack, the cost is 6, and you get 16 damage. That's good. That's strong damage. You can use it if your basic attack's not available. That's good. Good damage card. Rocket Launcher, 3-cost upgrade. Enters play with 2 charge counters on it. Exhaust Rocket Launcher and remove 1 charge. Choose a player. Deal 2 damage to the villain and each minion engaged with that player. Let's say that the player had 1 villain and then 1 minion engaged with him. Would this be good? You'd be paying 4 essentially for 8 damage. Yeah, it's good. If he had 2 minions engaged with them, it's exceptional. This is a great damage card. Usable when your basic action is not available. Great damage. These two tech upgrades are very strong damage for Rocket. Rocket's Pistol, 1-cost upgrade, enters play with 3 charge counters on it. Exhaust Rocket's Pistol and remove 1 charge counter from it. Deal 2 damage to an enemy. It's the least of the tech upgrades we've looked at, but it's not bad. Basically 2 cost for 6 damage. Yeah, it's not bad. Now all of these are restricted, and they all have charges on them, and the way you recycle them is flipping to your alter ego, and that's not good for solo. Because you're going to get your tech upgrades out, you're going to use up the charges, not be able to play any more copies of the tech upgrades, and be forced to flip to alter ego to resolve that situation. Unless there's a card that allows you to resolve it that we haven't looked at. And that's not good, because in solo you don't want to be flipping to your alter ego more than once per round. If that, you'd like to flip 0 times if you could get away with it. If you flip more than once, you're really tempting fate. Because even flipping once usually means the villain's going to advance the scheme in solo. And if you flip twice, then you probably have advanced the scheme to the point where you lose, unless you get lucky with the boost cards or something like that. So if you've got to go to alter ego twice in order to get rid of expired tech upgrades, that's not good. That is not good at all. But we'll see. Maybe there's a way to resolve that. So we got, well, this is the last card. While in hero form, Rocket gets +1 thwart and gains the aerial trait. So he has no way to remove any threat at all outside of his basic action. Which means you need to have your basic action available all the time, or you're going to get overwhelmed by threat. And it almost always needs to be used on thwarting. And that means you're going to have to face tank any attacks that get through your allies. Probably rules out protection, because protection provides additional defense, but still relies on you using your basic action to use it. And for the times when like desperate defense doesn't cover all the damage, or use Indomitable or something like that, or Never Back Down. I think it has to be leadership, and when attacks from the boss get through allies, you have to face tank them, or else you won't have any thwarting. And he's so squishy that that's going to be a big problem. So I think this is a weak hero for solo play. For that reason, there's a lot of times when you start out the game and you play 1 ally on turn 1, which means you're not setting up your tech upgrades, which means you're not going to have strong damage, but you play 1 ally and you block the boss attack, but the encounter card brings a second attack, and so he attacks you again, and now you've lost half your HP. Your ally's dead, having only gotten 1 action off, and then it dies blocking for you. A lot of encounters bring side quests or enemies to begin the game, which you're going to have trouble dealing with because you haven't been able to get a tech upgrade out yet, because you had to use your resources to get an ally in to block for you. This hero is going to struggle early. He's going to struggle with any kind of defense. This does not seem like a solo-focused hero to me. This seems like, similar to Hawkeye, a hero that can provide strong damage if he's got somebody to defend for him. And they were probably imagining a two-player scenario for this expansion where one player is playing Groot and one player is playing Rocket, and the Groot player plays Protection, and the Rocket player plays Aggression, or, I don't know, maybe Leadership, or Justice. So the Groot player handles defense and the Rocket player handles thwarting and attack. But in solo, each of them is gonna struggle significantly, I think. Rocket's just gonna get rolled over early, similar to Hawkeye. But his damage is strong for multiplayer. He seems like a strong damage champion, and seems like he'd be pretty fun to play in multiplayer. But I wouldn't expect much from him in solo, just from this first look at him. But we'll try him out, and we'll see. Let's take a look at the other cards that come in his deck. We've got Bug. They are, in fact, aggression cards, as expected. We've got Bug, 1/2 stats for 2 cost. After your hero makes a basic attack, heal 1 damage from Bug. So you can kind of just keep him on the table as long as you want, really. If you manage to keep him on the table for 2 or 3 turns, I think he's fine. He's okay. He's going to use up one of your ally slots doing that, but if you can keep him on the table for 5 or 6 turns, then he's great. I'd include him in an aggression deck. I like cheap allies. They don't typically stay around very long in solo on high difficulties because you almost always need him to defend a boss attack. And so if you only keep him on the table for 1 turn, he's not very good. If all he does is attack once and then die, he's not very good. But if you can keep him around for a few turns, he's decent. And a lot of turns, he's pretty good. Chase Them Down we've seen. Into the Fray we've seen. Pretty weak card. Looking for Trouble. Discard cards from the top of the encounter deck until you discard a minion. Put that minion into play engaged with you. Remove 3 threat from the main scheme. 0 cost. Isn't that exactly identical to Defender of the Nine Realms from Thor's set? It works in Thor's set because Thor draws 2 cards off of it. Without the drawing 2 cards off of it, this isn't very good. So I don't think I would play it. Would you add it to the Thor deck so you have Defender of the Nine Realms and Looking for Trouble if you were playing Aggression Thor? Yeah, I think you probably would. So it makes sense in Thor. I don't think it significantly improves him, but it makes sense in Thor. Probably not outside of Thor. Aggression in general is kind of weak right now. It's really about justice, leadership. Protection is getting there. Justice has got a lot of help in the second cycle. Relentless Assault we've seen before. Follow Through. When your hero's attack deals any amount of excess damage, increase that amount by 1. It's an upgrade. You'd have to use that like 6 times to make it good. That's hard to do. In a long game, if you got this early, I suppose it's possible. But not easy to make this good. Would it be worth a slot? Problem is, you don't want to make excess damage a goal generally. I know Rocket Raccoon can take advantage of it, so maybe it really only makes sense in him, but yeah, you don't usually want to make excess damage a goal. In fact, that's the opposite of what you usually want to do, so even in Rocket Raccoon, you're not playing Aggression Rocket Raccoon in solo on high difficulties, I don't think. You could play it for fun on normal difficulty and kind of blitz bosses down, maybe. But even so, if you're doing that, you wouldn't play this card because it's slow to pay off, requiring a lot of uses, so I don't really see a situation where this makes sense. Hand cannon, 2-cost upgrade, another tech upgrade. It is restricted, so if you played it in Rocket, it would use up one of his restricted slots, and you probably wouldn't do that for that reason alone, unless it's really good. It has 3 charges, and when you attack, you get +2 attack, so it requires the use of your basic ability, and Rocket really wants to use his for thwarting. Yeah, this doesn't really make sense to me. It's mediocre value, even best case scenario, and it's got downsides for Rocket, which is where it makes the most sense, maybe. Could you play it in Iron Man if you were playing Aggression Iron Man? Iron Man wants to be thwarting too and not usually basic attacking, but I suppose you could if you really wanted to play Aggression Iron Man, and it would help him get set up quicker. Groot, 3 cost, 1, 2, 6 stats. Play only if your identity has the Guardian trait. After Groot defends against an attack, heal 2 damage from him. Well, you could just have him defend against 1-cost attack, or attacks for 1 from minions all the time, and it would be a net gain of HP for him. So he could stay on the table indefinitely. This is a strong ally. I'd include it pretty much any deck where your hero has the Guardian trait. He's good. Similar to Rocket Raccoon, they're both strong. Rocket Raccoon is better. He's better faster. Groot's going to take a while before he gets there, but he will get there. Maybe like, I don't know, he has to heal like 5 times or something, I think, to really get to Rocket Raccoon's level. But Rocket Raccoon is exceptional. So, yeah, Groot's very good. I would definitely include him if your hero has the Guardian trait. And no one's playing Groot hero, and probably they won't be. Flora and Fauna place 2 growth counters on Groot, so that does nothing for his ally version. This is really and ready him, or place 2 charge counters on a Rocket Raccoon upgrade and ready that upgrade. 2 charge counters is worth like 8 damage. That's strong. That's very strong if you can get it off. These team ups are hard to get off in solo, but if you could, this is a very, very good card, exceptional card, if you can make it work. As was the Scarlet Witch Quicksilver one, but I found it difficult to make that work in solo. Booster Boots. Play only if your identity has the Guardian trait. When you would take any amount of damage from an attack, exhaust Booster Boots, discard the top card of your deck, and prevent 1 of that damage. It's good. I would include it for Guardians. Interesting that you could put Booster Boots on Groot. But I don't really consider discarding the top card of your deck to be a huge downside. So it's really just prevent 1 damage each turn, and that's great for 1 cost. I like it. I would include it in Guardian decks. And is that it? Yep, that's it. So overall, these heroes are on the weaker side for solo, I would say. I would consider Rocket Raccoon roughly equivalent to Hawkeye. Maybe a little bit stronger damage and a little bit less utility because there's no stun or confuse like Hawkeye has. But overall, roughly equivalent in their power level in solo, which is not that good. And Groot, one of the weakest heroes in the game, I think. But we'll see once we try them. We'll try them both out in solo against Red Skull, and we'll see if it's possible to defeat the Galaxy's Most Wanted campaign on Expert with either of these heroes. It may not be. We may need to turn to, I don't know, probably one of the most recent heroes we covered, like Scarlet Witch. We'll see. But overall, pretty disappointing player cards from this expansion, with the exception of the Rocket Raccoon ally, and to a lesser extent, but still pretty good, the Groot ally as well. So, thank you for watching.